Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Tuesday, June 17th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. As the Trump administration and Republicans move forward with major changes to policy, Democrats are finding it hard to get their footing.
One of the big points of controversy, I guess, during the Democratic convention had to do with age of officials.
Coming up, we'll hear how the California Democratic Party is trying to get focused as the midterm elections get underway in the coming months. But first, these news headlines. President Donald Trump has announced immigration agents will reduce enforcement on farms, but he's also directed agents to ramp up enforcement across so-called sanctuary cities. KVPR's Joshua Yeager reports one Valley leader is finding those two orders contradictory.
The city of Huron is one of just two in the entire San Joaquin Valley to formally embrace the sanctuary city label. This means the city proactively limits cooperation with federal agencies on immigration enforcement. More than 95% of Huron identifies as Latino or Hispanic. The community is also surrounded by farms that provide jobs. Ray Leon is the mayor. He says the president's recent directives on immigration to target sanctuary cities but spare the ag industry cancel each other out.
They are in direct conflict because our city is made up of agricultural industry supporters, workers, maintainers, food chain keepers.
Leon says concern about immigration enforcement has taken a toll on Huron's economy, as cautious residents choose to limit their activity. For KVPR News, I'm Joshua Yeager in Bakersfield.
Legislators are considering a bill that would pause mortgage payments for wildfire victims experiencing financial hardship. Cap Radio's Manolis Kaida has more.
The bill allows borrowers to pause payments for an initial 90 days. It would then allow for extensions up to a year. Assemblymember John Harabedian co-authored the bill. He says he introduced it shortly after the Eaton fire hit his district. He'd heard from community members that their banks initially weren't offering them a break from payments.
The thought of having to pay a mortgage on a house that was no longer there, as well as rent in a new place to live when you are underinsured and trying to figure out your life under these circumstances, is very daunting.
He says the bill would also allow borrowers to eventually start making payments again without worrying about a lump sum payment, negative credit reporting, or modifications to the loan. In Sacramento, I'm Manola Sikaida.
The price of beef is increasing nationwide, with the cost more than 12% higher last month compared to the same period in 2024. That's according to the Fresno Bee, which cited Consumer Price Index data. Experts tell the Bee that drought, high feed costs, and fewer ranchers are a source of the higher prices. They add that a higher demand for high-protein foods is also driving up the costs. California ranchers say they've had to cut their herds in recent years in light of economic challenges. A nationwide tour is aiming to rally opposition against the Trump administration's budget plans. The, quote, Stop the Billionaire Giveaway bus tour starts next week just outside New York City and has its last stop planned for Kern County next month. The progressive organizations Fair Share America and Unrig Our Economy are organizing the nearly month-long trip. They say they aim to call attention to budget cuts for social programs such as Medicaid. The budget bill passed the U.S. House of Representatives in May and has moved to the Republican-dominated Senate.
You're driving through the neighborhood one day, and there, in your neighbor's driveway, sits a metal mess of spider webs the likes of which you've never seen. It's a KVPR car. Tell your neighbors, your family, and your friends if they've got a car they no longer need, donate it. KVPR can turn that unwanted car into great radio. It's a super easy and totally free process. Visit kvpr.org/cars to learn more.
And now to our main story. Just this week, two major union leaders resigned from their roles as at-large members of the Democratic National Committee, citing concerns over the new chairman, Ken Martin. The New York Times said the departures, quote, represent a significant erosion of trust in the DNC, and also that this is a moment where Democrats are, quote, grappling for a message and messenger to lead the opposition to President Trump. Since the losses in the 2024 elections in November, Democrats have tried to do some soul-searching to find out what went wrong. The party's also contended in the last few months with new reporting that sheds light on former President Joe Biden's health challenges prior to dropping out of the race, namely his age and fitness to serve. And not only did National Democrats lose the White House, but they weren't able to flip the House and couldn't hold on to the Senate. All of this begs the question, where do Democrats go from here? Or what role can California Democrats play in the party's future, especially as campaigns for the 2026 midterm elections start to get underway? At the start of this month, California Democrats wrapped up their first gathering since the November elections. They held their annual convention in Anaheim. Republicans will also gather later this summer for their own convention in Orange County. Yue Stella Yu covers politics for our news partner Calmatters. She attended the California Democratic Party convention to understand a little bit more about the state party's future and where it stands right now. She found there are some differences within the party, even as they ponder big goals. Yue Stella starts our conversation by explaining the party's immediate priorities.
The party chair, Rusty Hicks, right, he talked about winning back the U.S. House as a top mission for the Democratic Party. And so since this wasn't an endorsement convention, things were pretty chill. Mostly the discussions were focused on re-electing party officers and passing a series of resolutions to kind of firm up the party's stance going forward. And so one of the big points of controversy, I guess, during the Democratic convention had to do with age of officials, right? And that absolutely strikes a chord with a lot of the young voters that I connected with. So a lot of them were feeling kind of disillusioned by how old their state and local officials or even federal candidates, presidential candidates, can be. And what we saw last year during the presidential election was a lot of frustration among Democrats at how old Joe Biden was, this concern that he could not connect with younger voters, that younger voters were refusing to turn out and feeling no passion because of his age.
In your reporting, you note that Democrats lost voters who pivoted towards President Donald Trump or just didn't vote altogether in the last election. Was anything shared at the convention about what the Democrats' plans are to sort of galvanize people to show up and be engaged moving forward?
Yeah, there's definitely talks among delegates about, better reaching young voters. First of all, there's this consensus that the Democratic Party should do better to reach younger voters. And that's just one of the key demographics, right? They also talked about this need to reach out to Latino voters who also drifted rightward toward Trump during the last presidential election. But specifically for young voters, I have heard some delegates say that the party should do a better job at holding town halls or going to where young voters are. And that may mean going into colleges and holding these direct engagement events where they open themselves up to questions from younger voters to help them engaged.
Moving forward, obviously, Democrats are going to try to recapture some U.S. House seats, especially in these sort of battleground districts. Any word on what the plan is there moving forward?
I've definitely heard the party officials talk about the importance of that. So the party chair has talked about the importance of capturing these seats, especially in the Central Valley. You see a lot of very close, very tight races last year. So a lot of that has to do with continuing to make inroads with younger voters, continuing to make inroads with Latino voters, and boosting turnout. I've heard from the party chair is a big part of their strategy. And specifically, you see a lot of the Democrats at the convention talking about David Valadao, who is a vulnerable Republican in the Central Valley. And they're talking about his vote on Medicaid. They're talking about these Republican incumbents and their votes and how they would hurt the economy and how they would, like what that would translate into your everyday life. And so that is part of their strategy right now is that the Democrats are trying to take the Republican incumbents' votes in Congress and interpreting them as a move that would hurt the economy, that would hurt your pocketbooks. And therefore, this is why we need a change.
Before I let you go, one big question still is, what is Kamala Harris's next move? Now, she obviously lost the presidential election. 3 options have been presented about where she might go next. Can you talk about those and just what her general absence right now in state or national politics sort of says or doesn't say?
Sure. Yeah, that was definitely an elephant in the room without actually being in the room, basically, right? She was one of the heavyweights who missed the California Democratic Convention. I am also very curious where she's going to be next, what her future plans are, right? So a few months ago, she gave this deadline that she would decide whether to jump into the gubernatorial race by the end of the summer. But the vibes I got at the convention, just by speaking to random delegates, is that not everybody was very thrilled at this prospect of Kamala Harris jumping into the race. Surely you have people who have been a longtime supporter of Kamala Harris. But there are people who feel that she might not be the best fit to lead California, especially after losing the presidential election in November. There are some concerns that if the party consolidates behind her, it sends a message to average voters that the party still hasn't learned from its lesson from November, that it's trying again, right, for someone who already lost on messaging to Donald Trump. And so there's definitely concerns like that. But there's also, especially among younger voters who felt really energized after Kamala Harris entered the race last year to run for president, there were some who said, they felt that the California governor, the position of the California governor would be below a former vice president. And so far, I mean, not a lot of the current candidates for governor have talked about the potential of Kamala Harris entering the race. Almost all of them are pledging to stay in the race, regardless of what Kamala Harris does next.
That was my conversation with Yue Stella Yu. She's a politics reporter for our news partner, Calmatters. And that is today's show. If you have a story idea for Central Valley Daily, we would love to hear from you. Just email podcast@kvpr.org. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden, Crescencio Rodriguez Delgado, and KVPR, with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
Planet Money helps you understand the economy. We find the people at the center of the story.
Garbage in New York, that was like a controlled substance.
We show you how money influences everything.
Tell me what you like by telling me how you spend your money.
And we dig until we get answers.
I had a bad feeling you're going to bring that up.
Planet Money finds out. All you have to do is listen. The Planet Money Podcast from NPR.